Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite. I'm your host, Jim Chapman, and today we are back with another episode of Bad Teachers State-Specific Series, and this time we are going to go to Ohio. Now, last week I went to Georgia, and I told you the stories of 6 different teachers, with 2 of those cases involving teachers who not only knew what each other was doing, but they also were friends with each other. Now, in the case of Georgia, I was disappointed in a couple of things. The lack of publicly available information was very concerning. You can disclose what's going on, y'all, without disclosing victims, and knowledge is power in these types of cases. The sweeping under the rug is why this has now become pretty much an epidemic nationwide. The second concerning issue about Georgia was the slow pace in which these cases are getting resolution. One of those cases I covered was from 2020 and still no resolution on that case. So if the lack of details frustrated you and you're much like me and that shit just pisses you off, I can assure you that's not going to be the case with the first subject that I cover today. We're going to Ohio, and before we do, I want to give you a warning. Now, what I'm about to cover is very descriptive, it's very detailed, so if it's something you would rather not hear, go ahead and turn this podcast off now. If you're someone that wants the straight up facts and you realize this is real life, it happens unfortunately every day, and the more people that see how messed up this problem has become, the better off we are as a society, well, keep listening because this one's going to shock you. Now, this first story is going to bring us to Gallipolis, Ohio, where a cheerleading coach and a former substitute teacher named Paige Huck was arrested in 2023 for having inappropriate relationships involving multiple students. This was between about a decade time period, starting around 2004, and these assaults were allegedly in cooperation with her husband, Martthew Huck. Her husband was the head wrestling coach at River Valley High School, even beyond her arrest, and we'll get into that. Now, this is most certainly the most shocking case of bad teachers I have covered thus far, so get ready and let's get into it. And I'm going to start by giving you what little bit of background on Paige Huck that I have. Not much is out there regarding her background prior to getting married, but somewhere around 1999, she marries ag teacher and high school wrestling coach by the name of Martthew Huck. Now, also around that time in 1999, which incidentally she's in her early 20s, she decides she's going to start substituting at the school, which she does. And it was during that time as well that she takes on the role of a cheerleading coach and kind of an advisor for that cheerleading team. And she and her husband, they would host a lot of events and get-togethers at their house for the cheer squad and the wrestling squad primarily. Remember, he's the head wrestling coach. Now, these events would include lock-ins. They would have team sleepovers, which, as we'll get into, some of these events were co-ed, which, I mean, you got the wrestling team and the cheer team sleeping in the same house together? I mean, nothing bad can happen, right? Come on. So this continues for several years, and there's no documented allegations of anything improper, documented being the key word. But then shit hits the fan. Now, rather than take you through the entire timeline, I'm going to skip forward all the way to August of 2023. And Paige Huck gets indicted and arrested. At the time, she was indicted for 6 counts of sexual conduct with minors involving multiple wrestlers ages 13 to 16 over a 13-year period. Now, I know some of you listen to the Bad Teacher series and you say, well, it was a 17-year-old guy. He was a senior in high school. It's not really that bad. How about 13? How's that for bad? So according to the probable cause affidavit, investigators were able to uncover just a pattern of abuse that was rampant, where she exploited her role as a substitute teacher and a cheerleading coach to abuse At that time, 4 students, though more would be uncovered later, with the acts occurring in vehicles. They would occur at those home events I told you about. Primarily, those were the places. Now, the investigation would also uncover the fact that the school had allegedly been receiving complaints, buckle up for this, receiving complaints about Paige Huck and this sexual abuse dating all the way back to 2004 and did not report it. Can you believe that? This investigation would also lead police to discover she had been banned from the campus regarding the allegations in 2011, then again in 2016, and then again in 2019. But the investigation would say that these bans were not enforced, and school officials who were told about this did nothing in their roles as mandated reporters to report the allegations. We talked about that before. A mandated reporter is someone like another teacher that hears that her fellow teacher is having sex with a student and she doesn't tell anybody. You are mandated, you are obligated by law to report that. So in August of 2023, Paige gets arrested. She goes to court. She enters a plea of not guilty. She posts bond and she is released pending trial. You with me so far? Now, a couple of things to point out before we go any further. First, at the time of her arrest in 2023, Paige and her husband had been divorced about 3 years, Martthew Huck. They had been divorced since around 2020. So as you can imagine, all this comes out, and I would love to tell you it shocked the whole community, but the truth is, I can't. Why? Because when I researched this case, I came across some original news articles that were posted on Facebook. And it seemed that everyone knew this was going on and had been going on. The Facebook comments underneath the post were shocking. Everyone knew. Everyone had told whoever would listen, it appears, allegedly, and no one did anything. But I don't think the whole community knew exactly what was going on, exactly how disturbing it was. But they would find out when on November 20th of 2023, just 3 months after the arrest of Paige Huck, a lawsuit drops in federal court. And let me tell you, I have covered hundreds of lawsuits on Exposed. This one, I don't think I've ever seen anything more detailed. So let's get into it. And the lawsuit is suing several people, including River Valley High School, the superintendent of schools, the principal of schools, Paige Huck, and her wrestling coach husband, Martthew Huck. They're all included in this lawsuit. And I'm going to read you the factual allegations because I have the lawsuit right here in front of me. And it starts off, Paige Huck was hired by River Valley High School as a freshman cheerleading coach advisor in 1999. She continued in various positions, including but not limited to JV cheerleading coach, varsity cheerleading coach, and substitute teacher at River Valley High School until 2008. Paige Huck, at all relevant times herein, was the spouse of River Valley High School wrestling coach and teacher, Coach Huck. Paige Huck and Coach Huck divorced on or about January 14th of 2020 after plaintiff graduated from high school. And plaintiff is the victim who brought the suit in this case. Goes on to say Paige Huck and Coach Huck would frequently host parties, sleepovers, and lock-ins at their private residence, which typically included members of the cheerleading squad, football team, wrestling team, and FFA organization. In November of 2004, the Hucks hosted a lock-in for RVHS cheerleaders and wrestlers at their private residence. At this lock-in, the Hucks played pornography for the students on the TV in the living room. In addition, Paige Huck engaged in sexual intercourse with numerous male students. Male students stood in line and took turns having sex with Paige Huck in the bedroom while Coach Huck stood next to them and watched the sexual activity. Y'all, she had a train ran on her with a bunch of high school kids while her husband watched. You can't make that shit up. 3 cheerleaders who witnessed the above described events immediately reported what they saw to Principal Jacobs the next school day. They specifically told him about the pornography, Paige Huck having sex with students, and Coach Huck watching all of this. Principal Jacobs simply said, quote, "I'll look into it." These cheerleaders were never contacted again regarding what they reported to Principal Jacobs. No investigation or report of Coach Huck or Paige Huck's misconduct was performed by defendant BOE or its employees, which is the school. Following this report to Principal Jacobs, the cheerleaders were harassed by multiple RVHS staff members, including Paige Huck, prompting one to quit cheerleading altogether. And that's important, y'all, because that's why this shit don't get reported anymore. As we go along, you're going to say, how did they not tell the school about this? Well, look what happened when someone did. You think that didn't get around the school rather quickly? This fact indicates that Principal Jacob failed to properly protect the identity of the witnesses who reported the inappropriate behavior, subjected them to harassment and discouragement of any future witnesses from being honest and forthright about what they saw the Hucks doing with students. The report to Principal Jacobs is not even noted in the personnel file of Paige Huck or Coach Huck. In 2004, the Hucks hosted a gathering at their home where minor students engaged in drinking alcohol and smoking. There were many wrestlers and football players present in addition to the cheerleaders, most of whom were juniors and seniors. Victim A, a then 16-year-old student at RVHS, attended this gathering at the Hucks' home as she was on the cheerleading squad. During the gathering, Victim A was lying on the floor when Paige Huck and Coach Huck came in and laid beside her. Coach Huck put his hand down the shirt of Victim A. She froze up and pretended to be asleep. Paige Huck then asked Coach Huck, quote, "Is she asleep?" Coach Huck proceeded to put his hands down the pants of Victim A and began touching her vagina. Victim A continued to be asleep, but then got up from the encounter crying and heading to the bathroom. Victim A asked a friend to take her home, and during the drive, the friend told Victim A the same type of assault happened to her at the hands of the Hucks. Victim A went to see the guidance counselor at RVHS to report that Coach Huck had touched her. The assistant principal at the time, Principal Moore, overheard what Victim A reported about Coach Huck. Principal Moore then intervened, grabbed Victim A by the shoulders and said, "We can talk about this later." Victim A was never approached by anyone, including Principal Moore, to further discuss this report of sexual assault. Victim A later learned from younger students that Coach Huck was bragging about his assault of Victim A. Defendants took no action to investigate or report the complaint made by Victim A. Then it goes into victims B, C, and D. Paige Huck had sexual contact during the 2005-2006 school year with victim B, then a 17-year-old senior wrestler at RVHS. The sexual contact happened on at least 2 occasions during 2005-2006 school year, prior to victim B's graduation from high school. The incidents of sexual contact occurred during the end-of-season wrestling sleepover at a separate party with underage students and alcohol, both held at the Huck residence. Paige Huck was employed by the school at the time of the sexual conduct with victim B as a cheerleading coach at RVHS. Coach Huck was present at the home when victim B had sex with Paige Huck and was aware of the sexual activity between his wife and the wrestler/student, even facilitating such sexual activity in the Huck's bedroom. Paige Huck had sexual contact with victim C, another wrestler who was 13 years old at the time that these sexual encounters began. Victim C was a middle schooler, but was invited by Coach Huck to practice with the high school wrestling team. Sexual encounters with Paige Huck continued on several occasions between 2003 and 2008. Paige Huck was employed by the school at the time as RVHS cheerleading coach and substitute teacher. The first sexual contact with victim C occurred when Paige Huck performed oral sex on victim C, remember 13 years old, y'all, in the Huck's van on the way home from a wrestling meet held at another school. Coach Huck was driving the van and 3 other students were also in the van at the time. Sexual encounters continued through victim C's high school years while he was a wrestler at RVHS. These activities occurred in the Huck's residence, the Huck's van, and often involved the use of alcohol and prescription drugs, sometimes provided by the Hucks. On another occasion, Paige Huck had sexual contact with victim C and another unidentified minor student at the same time at the Huck residence. A freaking threesome with 2 underage kids. Victim C had dozens of sexual encounters with Paige Huck through his middle school and high school years. On several occasions, Coach Huck was home while victim C was having sex with Paige Huck at the Huck home. On more than one occasion, victim C saw Coach Huck watching him have sex with Paige Huck through an open bedroom door. Also, during the 2007-2008 school year, Paige Huck was involved in a sexual incident with another RVHS athlete, victim D, while she was employed at the school as the RVHS cheerleading coach and substitute teacher. Victim D was 17 at the time, and he would frequently drive to a bowling alley where he met Coach Huck, who would drive victim D to the Huck residence for the explicit purpose of sexual encounters with Paige Huck. These efforts were undertaken to hide the fact that victim D was at the Huck residence. Think about that, y'all. He's parking his car and getting in with the coach to go screw the coach's wife. Paige Huck had sex with victim D at least 40 times during his high school experience. These sexual encounters happened at the wrestling sleepover at RVHS, in the FFA office, in a hotel room at an FFA national convention, and on the way back from the FFA convention in the Huck's van. Other FFA students were present in that van. Following many months of sexual activity with victim D, the administration became aware of the sexual abuse of victim D and possibly others. Rather than fully properly investigate the sexual activity, the school instead simply allowed Paige Huck to resign her employment. The school allowed this despite the prior reports of Paige Huck's sexual conduct with students, including the reports made by the 3 cheerleaders and separately by victim A. No investigation or report of Paige Huck's misconduct was performed by the defendant schools or the employees, which is a violation of all kinds of laws, it says. Upon information and belief, Paige Huck's egregious misconduct was resolved in a private agreement between her and the prior staff at the school, the terms which resulted in a resignation and supposed prohibition from her entering the campus. It goes on to say, despite knowledge of Paige Huck's inappropriate actions with students, RVHS administrators did not enforce their prohibition on Paige Huck of entering the school grounds. On the contrary, Paige Huck continued interacting with students on school grounds with the constructive and actual knowledge of school administration. Consequently, Paige Huck was given free rein to prey upon, groom, and ultimately have sexual conduct with additional RVHS students from 2008 to 2019 involving plaintiff. In February 2011, following an inappropriate altercation with students at a wrestling meet, an authorized representative of the school limited Paige Huck's presence at the school to that of spectator only and documented concerns about her questionable and inappropriate conduct. Now, let me say this. Why would you let her on the campus at all? Basically, this lady has, there's all these allegations of her having sex with all these students, and the school is still saying, well, you can come to the school as a spectator, you just can't come as a teacher. I move on. Between 2014 and 2016, Paige Huck was again permitted to enter the campus, where she groomed and then initiated and maintained sexual contact with at least 2 additional students. A letter dated September 28, 2016, written by Superintendent Myers to Paige Huck and signed by Principal Edwards, barred Paige Huck again from RVHS campus for all activities that did not directly involve her children. Where are the police in all this, y'all? This letter is maintained in Paige Huck's personnel file within the school and referenced deep concerns over Paige Huck's conduct with students. The letter also notes that Superintendent Myers had been aware of concerns within the community for several years. Remember those Facebook posts I told you about? Makes sense now. They've been telling this person this shit. The letter references that it was given to Paige Huck in the presence of the superintendent, the principal, and the assistant principal on September 28, 2016. Paige Huck was nonetheless permitted to be present on campus thereafter, and she continued to initiate sexual contact with the plaintiff, in this case, now a senior student and minor at the time. And it goes on, access to victim E and plaintiff. Paige Huck was approximately 38 years old when she started sexually abusing victim E, a 15-year-old at the time, and the plaintiff, a 17-year-old at the time. The first sexual encounter involved all three parties getting together, and that occurred in February of 2016. In the fall of 2015, Paige Huck started attending wrestling practices at RVHS despite being banned from campus. At these practices, Paige Huck would wrestle the plaintiff and victim E and touch them inappropriately, often in front of Coach Huck and other teammates. Additionally, Paige Huck sent nude photographs of herself to both students independently. These incidents took place on school property during the supposed ban of Paige Huck's attendance. No member of the faculty, including her then-husband, Coach Huck, stopped Paige Huck from entering or maintaining a presence at the campus despite the clearly documented restrictions. No school official, including her then-husband, Coach Huck, principal, or superintendent, ever asked Paige Huck to leave the campus or enforced a ban on her presence despite actual or constructive knowledge of previous sexual misconduct. On the evening of February of 2016, plaintiff was at the Huck's home with victim E. Plaintiff was a senior on the high school wrestling team, and victim E was a freshman on the team. The Hucks both invited plaintiff and victim E to spend the night at their home prior to traveling to a wrestling tournament the next morning. Plaintiff, victim E, and Paige Huck were sitting on the couch, and Coach Huck was sitting in the chair in the same living room. While Coach Huck, the Hucks' minor child who was asleep at the time, and the plaintiff were present in the same room, and at Paige Huck's instruction, victim E began using his fingers to finger Paige Huck's vagina. Thereafter, Coach Huck took his minor child to bed, went to his bedroom alone, and left the plaintiff and victim E with Paige Huck. So a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and Paige Huck in that bedroom. Get this, soon thereafter, Paige Huck decides to start the movie 50 Shades of Grey. I know everybody out there is familiar with that. It's a bondage movie, a highly inappropriate, erotic movie on the television. Paige Huck proceeded to have sexual intercourse with the plaintiff and victim E. And get this, while they were engaged in the sexual act, Coach Huck texted Paige Huck and he asked her, what is she doing? And Paige Huck, y'all, responded to Coach Huck via text and said that she, quote, was fucking one and sucking the other, unquote. To which Coach Huck responds, that's hot. Don't get caught. I mean, you can't make that shit up, y'all. After this text, plaintiff learned that Coach Huck was watching the sexual intercourse between Paige Huck, victim E, and the plaintiff from a window on the front porch. Coach Huck coordinated and facilitated this sexual encounter at his home with his then wife, despite being fully aware of Paige Huck's sexual misconduct with prior students, her ban from school property, and directive to keep away from students. And then it gets into some other sexual abuse of victim E and the plaintiff in 2016, an incident that occurred in Huck's car. So in or around February of 2016, Coach Huck was driving to a wrestling tournament while the plaintiff, victim E, and Paige Huck were in the back seat of the same vehicle. Assistant wrestling coach Tyler Ward was in the front passenger seat sitting beside Coach Huck. With Paige Huck in the middle back seat, she stimulated with her hand the plaintiff and victim E's genitals while they touched her vagina. So they're fingering her and she's beating them off. Coach Huck facilitated this transportation and allowed his wife to sit in the back seat with the plaintiff and victim E, despite fully being aware of her ban from campus and orders to keep away from other students due to prior inappropriate sexual contact. In or around February of 2016, Coach Huck held an overnight event for the FFA organization at a local gymnastics facility where Paige Huck was an employee. School officials, including the principal, superintendent, they were aware Coach Huck was hosting an overnight event, but recklessly and intentionally failed to prohibit the event, supervise the event, or verify Paige Huck was not going to be at the event. During the overnight event, Paige Huck had sexual intercourse with victim E in the foam pit and performed oral sex on the plaintiff. Coach Huck was present at the facility and recklessly failed to supervise the plaintiff and his teammates with full knowledge they would be sexually abused. Coach Huck facilitated this overnight event for wrestlers despite being fully aware of Paige Huck's previous misconduct and subsequent ban from campus. On or about February 29th of 2016, a nude photograph of Paige Huck was discovered on victim E's cell phone at school. It was reported to school officials. However, no one from the school relayed the history of concerning behavior of Paige Huck to anyone, nor did they report that she had been instructed not to have contact with students because of similar questionable behavior. Paige Huck claimed that she had mistakenly sent that nude photograph to victim E. No investigation was completed by the school. Another report stated that Paige Huck sent nude photographs to victim E and the students sent nude photographs back to her via Snapchat. The report further stated that the complaint could be potentially a federal crime due to the transmission of nude images of children and would be referred to local law enforcement. Nonetheless, there is no evidence it was ever referred to local law enforcement or further investigated. The report indicates the victim E's parents attended a meeting with school administrators on or about February 29th of 2016 about those pictures that were sent and received. Soon thereafter, victim E's mother had an in-person discussion with Coach Huck about those pictures sent to the student by Paige Huck and reported to the school. Coach Huck was fully aware of the inappropriate pictures sent by his wife and was aware of the prior sexual activity between his wife and victim E. Coach Huck failed to report his knowledge of the prior sexual abuse during this discussion. Principal Edwards, Superintendent Myers, and other unknown school employees were aware of additional details of prior alleged sexual abuse, but they failed to report any of that. And soon after the nude photograph incident, the plaintiff ended his sexual contact with Paige Huck. Following the plaintiff's refusal to engage in further sexual activity, listen to this, with Paige Huck, Coach Huck began to retaliate against the plaintiff by violently assaulting him during wrestling practice. And y'all, I've seen a picture of this guy. He's a big dude, like 280 pounds, stocky guy. On more than one occasion, Coach Huck choked the plaintiff past the point of consciousness. Coach Huck also punched the plaintiff in the face, which caused bleeding at one practice. Plaintiff was abused in this way by Coach Huck during practices through the remainder of the wrestling season, and the plaintiff graduated from the school in May of 2016. So then it goes into the years of 2016 to 2019, and it says Paige Huck continued the sexual abuse of victim E, primarily at the Huck's residence, for a period of 3 more years. Other encounters took place when victim E stayed overnight with Paige Huck and Coach Huck in hotels at out-of-town wrestling tournaments and in the backseat of vehicles driven by Coach Huck. For example, in March of 2017, Paige Huck, Coach Huck, victim E, and Tyler Ward all shared a room, and Tyler Ward, y'all, is an assistant wrestling coach, all shared a room in Youngstown, Ohio, while there for a junior wrestling tournament. During the middle of the night, with Coach Huck in the hotel room, Paige Huck proceeded to have sex with victim E on the floor in the hotel room between the beds. This and other acts of sex abuse of victim E occurred at least 20 times after the plaintiff reported to high school administrators about the sexual abuse of himself and victim E by Paige Huck in July of 2016. So Paige Huck in 2019 was again banned from the campus 3 years after the plaintiff's report of abuse. A letter dated March of 2019 references a meeting between Paige, Coach Huck, Principal Edwards, and Superintendent Myers to discuss her ongoing sexual behavior with students. Can you believe this, y'all? This has been going on. Now we're coming up over a decade, and these people are sitting here having meetings with this chick and saying, hey, we got to ban you from campus again because you can't quit fucking kids. And the police ain't done shit. I don't even know if they knew about it by this point. Apparently, no one's reported it to them. But it goes on to say, despite the foregoing, Coach Huck continued his employment as a teacher and head wrestling coach at RVHS. Paige Huck, although no longer employed at the school, continued to be present on school property and had ongoing access to students, particularly high school wrestlers, at wrestling-related events and other activities. Now, as you just learned, her husband was all about it, right? And it may shock you to know that at this point in time, he was still employed by that damn school, as I just told you, still as the head wrestling coach. Now, following the lawsuit, he was finally placed on administrative leave pending if there would be any sort of investigation. And it shouldn't surprise you to know that in April of 2024, he is indeed arrested, and he enters a plea of not guilty at his plea hearing to 4 counts in his arrest affidavit. Now, he was charged with 1 count of rape related to the sexual assault of that female teenager that I just read you in that lawsuit where he was sticking his hands down her pants, etc. That occurred in 2004, remember? He was also charged with 3 counts of complicity to commit unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, meaning he was complicit in all this. He knew about everything that was going on with Paige Huck and these wrestlers and did not report it. So at this time, he's facing 26 years in prison, possibly, for these charges. He pleads not guilty, and much like his ex-wife, at this time, he gets a bond set, which is $250,000. He pays that, and he's released on bond. So they go to trial, and they actually are tried on the same day or on the same week. And this is January of 2025, January 21st to be exact. And before I get into the results of that, I do want to shout out the state of Ohio for moving this case along. You know, it's reasonable within 2 years to go from allegations to a conviction. Now, it's not reasonable. All this history was behind that. But by the time they prosecuted this, it didn't take that long, especially considering this stuff went to trial. They did a pretty good job here, in my opinion. Now, the sentence in this case is where I'm not happy. And we'll take Martthew Huck first. He was facing 26 years in prison. Here's what he got. Now, it's important to mention this was a bench trial, meaning a judge imposed the sentence. There was no jury that would recommend a sentence. The judge had all the latitude there. And the judge sets a sentence of 6 years in prison. That's it. He was found guilty, meaning Martthew Huck, of 1 count of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor and 3 counts of sexual endangerment, which these are reduced charges. Now, why they reduced his charges when he had a bench trial, I have no idea. But there you have it, 6 years. That's it. I mean, it seems like he did a lot over a pretty long time period. He should have gotten at least the minimum. He should have got sentenced to at least a year for each year that he was complicit in and committed these crimes, which would have at a minimum been 12 years. Boom, been 12 years. Now let's get to Paige Huck. Well, same situation as her husband. It was a bench trial. And on January 21st of 2025, she was also convicted of reduced charges. She was found guilty on 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor and 2 counts of sexual battery. That's it. After screwing, some people would say, up to 8 or more high school age students from the ages of 13 on, she was giving y'all a 13-year-old a blowjob in her car. All of this over a 12-year period, and that's what she's found guilty of. That is an atrocity. If there's anyone out there that is a prime example of a predator, it is this lady right here who is getting off on teenage kids for 12 years, being banned from school 3 times, and she can't stop. That's facts. How much jail time you think she got? Had to be at least 20 years, right? 25? I mean, I've covered cases where it's been one person over a 1-month time frame and the teacher gets 10 years. Nope, For all that I just told you and read you, she gets 10 years total, comprising 4 consecutive 30-month terms. She has to register on as a sex offender for the rest of her life, and she'll be on parole for 5 years after she's released. Unfreaking believable. Now, just my opinion here, this woman's going to get out, and she's still going to go after young kids. She likes them young. She likes them underage. I'm telling you. Now, that's just my opinion, my belief only. But you don't do this shit for 12 years so blatantly and just quit. She's got some sort of illness. That's a sickness without a prescription, my opinion. All right, so I got one more for you today. Now, compared to the one that I just read you, I don't think anything could be any worse. This one not quite as bad, but bad nonetheless and very different. And for this particular teacher, we're going to go to Cincinnati, Ohio, and St. Xavier Catholic High School. And I'm going to tell you about Catholic school counselor by the name of Emily Nutley. Now, before I go into what we are now not alleging, she's admitted to all of this, I'm going to set it up because looks in this situation play a bigger role than in some of the cases that I cover. And that is because in the case of this particular teacher who was in her 40s, she's gorgeous. And I know some people would say, you know, why are you focusing on the looks? What does it matter what she looks like? It matters in this case, and I'll tell you when I get to it. But what I can tell you is she's striking, a very beautiful woman, 40 plus year old woman. And there's a reason why I get into it. But I promise you, it plays a key role. So Emily Nutley's role at this school was to counsel kids who had academic issues. They were struggling academically, and she would meet with them privately, and in many occasions, she would meet in her office, and she would try to get to the cusp of what they were struggling with academically. So a lot of trust placed in this lady, right? Now, at the point in time that we're going to talk about, it's 2023. That's when these incidents occurred. And at the time, Emily was 43 years old. So she's 46 now. And as I said above, just absolutely gorgeous 43-year-old. And she has an equally beautiful family. She has 3 young kids. They appear all to be under the age of 10 or thereabouts. And she has an equally handsome husband. So it was in 2023 that she was counseling a particular student who was 17. And she starts initiating contact with him via text. Now, it starts out innocent, like they always do. You know, how are your grades? Those sort of things. And there's a progression from there, like you see in most cases. And she starts grooming this 17-year-old. Now, at some point, she actually sends him some explicit text. And I'm talking completely nude photographs of herself. She asks for some in return, which the student complies. And so between the year of 2023 and 2024, they have at least 4 encounters of sexual activity, oral sex, and intercourse. Now, at least one of these meetings took place in her office after school hours. Again, this is a married mother of 3 at this point, an 18-year vet counselor. And this is what she's doing. And it's important to mention that in the Cincinnati area, this was a very elite all-boys school. This is where all the rich kids went, academically an unbeatable reputation. So my point of all that is this can happen anywhere. It doesn't just happen in public schools where maybe underprivileged kids are taken advantage of. That's important to keep in mind. This was for the rich kids, this school. So step into this 17-year-old's position for a minute. Must have been great, right? He's sleeping with this really hot teacher who is all over him. He must love it. Well, no, he didn't. And that's my point with the looks. As a matter of fact, the student in mid-2024, he attempts to end the relationship with this beautiful 43-year-old woman. Folks, the reason I bring that up is if you're 40 years old and you're screwing a 43-year-old teacher who is hot like this lady is, all good. But 17-year-old guys, a lot of times, they don't want to mess. That's old to them, 43, no matter how hot she is. And this dude was trying to cut all this off. And guess what? What do you think she does? Well, rather than coming to her freaking senses and think, okay, here's my way out of this mess that I've made, these bad decisions, these crimes that I've committed. Here's my way out. I can let him go about his business. I'm going to go about mine and nobody has to know. Well, she threatens to kill herself. She tells this 17-year-old kid, I'm going to kill myself if you leave me. Not only that, but she starts paying him money because she's fearing that he's going to speak to authorities. So she's trying to buy his silence, if you will. So by the middle of 2024, rumors start circulating, as they always do. These kids talk, right? And it gets back to the principal. And this triggers an internal investigation. Now, the school calls the victim into the office, and he discloses all these dirty details, and he had all of the receipts, and I'm talking text from this lady to him all day long, all night long, nude photographs, you name it. He had proof he was trying to distance himself from her, and he also detailed all those sexual encounters. So subsequently, on October 11th of 2024, just 4 days after interviewing the student, she gets fired from St. Xavier High School, that private Catholic school, and the police are called and they turn over all this evidence from their internal investigation. Now, the case I told you just prior to this, you see the difference? That first school that I told you about, that I read you the lawsuit about, they should have handled it the exact same way St. Xavier High School handled it. That's the difference. That's why this one didn't last 20 years like the other one did. So this teacher gets arrested. She gets indicted, and the charges allege that Nutley engaged in multiple sexual encounters with the student, including at least 4 instances both on and off the school grounds, beginning in late 2023. Prosecutors detailed that she initiated contact via sexually explicit text messages, sent nude photos of herself, requested images of the students, provided him a monthly allowance of $100, and even bought him a pickleball membership. She even supplied answers to an upcoming test as part of the grooming behavior. And at this point, she's facing a potential max sentence of 15 years in prison. She gets a bond hearing. Bond is set at $100,000. She pays that, and she's allowed to go home with a GPS monitor. Now, as soon as she's arrested, and shout out to her husband, he realizes this ain't the person that I married. This is bullshit. This is disgusting. And he files for divorce. So, as common in these cases, there's a negotiation period, right? The defense team and the prosecution team, they're going to negotiate on, a plea bargain, a plea deal of some sort before the trial commences. They're trying to work out a deal. Well, in this case, it seemed like they were going to go to trial, which was different than what I usually see in these cases when someone is dead to rights with all this evidence. But the day of trial, that changes. Nutley walks into court and she pleads guilty. Now, that is the day of the trial. So at the last minute, they figure out, her defense team, I would imagine, that we're not going to be able to cut any more of a deal than we already have. She pleads guilty. And I don't always have the luxury of having these actual recordings of these people when they make their plea in court. But in this case, I do. So I'm going to play that clip. And this is Emily Nutley speaking out just prior to the judge sentencing her. So she pleads guilty. And then she basically makes an appeal to the judge that, hey, I'm this perfect person now and you don't need to sentence me to jail time, etc. I'm going to let you listen to it. Here's that.
Your Honor, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I stand before you today overwhelmed with shame, guilt, and regret. There is no excuse for what I did, and I will not try to offer one. I crossed a boundary that never should have been crossed, and I violated the trust of someone who needed to be protected and respected. I live every day with the heavy burden of knowing that I caused that harm. I see clearly now that the way that I acted was clearly out of line, not only with the law, but with the basic human decency that I've lived my whole life trying to live by. I carry that truth with me constantly, and it makes me sick. I think every day about the impact of my actions, not just on the victim, but on his family, his friends, and the entire St. X community. In addition to losing my job, the license to do what I love, and being registered as a lifelong sex offender, I've lost my husband, my home, my family, my friends, and my reputation in the community that I love. I'm a mother of 3 children, and I have to look at them knowing that I failed them in the most serious way imaginable. Instead of being viewed as their role model, I have caused harm and embarrassment. I will never stop feeling the weight of that and will spend every day to attempt to rebuild those relationships. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove myself on probation where I can continue rehabilitation instead of incarceration. I do not take that lightly, and the lifelong consequences of my actions are felt every day. I will continue my 2-year treatment program that I'm already an active participant, and I'm committed to take every step required of me to serve our community. Not because it's mandated, but because I owe it to the court, to the person that I've hurt, and to myself. I'm engaging with professionals who are helping me understand why I made these choices and how to take responsibility for every part of them. I wish more than anything I could go back in time and undo the choices I made and the boundaries that I allowed to be violated. I always got everyone else the help that they needed, but failed to look in the mirror when I was at my own lowest point. I wish that I'd asked for help sooner. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I've not earned it. I know that people may just see me as my worst mistake, and maybe that's what I deserve. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends through my actions. Thank you, Your Honor.
If you caught on to it like I did, she seemed kind of robotic in that. To me, anyway, it just seemed like she was not having any real remorse. She said all the right things, but it wasn't the right inflection of her voice. It just didn't seem right. The judge agreed. And so I'm going to play the following clip with the judge speaking on just that, as well as handing down the sentence in this case to Emily Nutley. And here's that.
So back to the sentencing factors, I left off at remorse, which I do not find genuine remorse in this case. And there's another factor I wanted to address that the detective put in his statement, and the prosecutor, Ms. Dieters, mentioned about what happened in this case now that we know all the facts. What are they thinking about what's the sentence going to be? Because I agree with Ms. Dieters. If they think they're just going to get a slap on the wrist, then why not? And I do consider that to an extent. And putting this all together and thinking this through, and I have been giving this a lot of thought, because if anybody knows me, they know that sentencing is the hardest thing I do on this bench. First, I want to address the family who's asked for the maximum prison term, which is 5 years on count 1, 5 years on count 5, to be served consecutively. I do find I could make this consecutive findings, which means the possible maximum sentence is 10 years. And I considered that. And no one addressed the consecutive findings in any of their materials. The state's not asking for consecutive. But I looked it up and I thought about it and I've considered it. But when I balance everything, I do not think a 10-year prison term is the just term here. And you don't have to agree with me, but I just want you to know I did consider it seriously. And I did consider probation. Ms. Nutley, I think, talked to lawyers who practice in this courthouse. I love probation. I have a 90% success rate. Of the 90% of the people I've put on probation in the last 4 years have not gone to prison. I find that to be a success. But in this situation, I believe that the proper sentence is 3 years in prison on count 1, 3 years on count 5 to be served at the same time, for an aggregate sentence of 3 years in prison. The parole board must put you on a period of post-release control of 5 years after you get out of prison. And these sentences And you are also subject to Tier 3 sex offender reporting restrictions, which I'll go over in just a moment. I will not require that you pay any fines, but you are required to pay court costs and a $30 reparations fee. I will put in my sentencing entry, Ms. Nutley. I do take this very seriously, that there were comments that you had suicidal thoughts at one point. You went to the Lindner Center. There was comments from something I read, worried that you might have suicidal ideations yourself. So I will put in the sentencing entry that ODRC will be required to evaluate you and the jail, if you'll start at the jail, for a suicide ideation and provide all precautions necessary at the time that you're taken into custody.
So at first, when the judge started talking, I was on the judge's side. Then she kind of disappointed me. Now, while I understand she felt maybe 10 years was a little bit too much, I felt like she was just a little bit cold to the family of the victim. Yeah, they were seeking the maximum sentence, and that's their right, but the way she put it to them by saying, quote, "You don't have to agree with me," I don't know, it turned me off. And then she imposes the sentence, and it's 3 years, and sets it concurrent rather than consecutive, meaning 3 years total, not 3 years for each count. Now, she'll probably serve half of that, so she'll effectively be out in the middle of next year or shortly after. But I will say, again, I'll give Ohio credit for moving this case along. That one moved extremely quick compared to what the average is. So they're moving them along, but it doesn't seem like they're getting the sentences that they should get in these cases. But there you have it. Paige Huck, Martthew Huck, Emily Nutley. That's who we covered today. Stay tuned for another Bad Teachers State Series episode coming next week. I'm not even sure where I'm going to go next. I'm going to surprise y'all. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the Patreon. I'm going to upload all kinds of files on this case I just covered. We got commercial-free early releases, bonus episodes. We send quarterly gifts to our top-tier Patreon members and so much more. Patreon.com/exposed podcast files. I can't do any of this without all of those people. I love them to death. And until next time for Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.